If people interpret Free Palestine as being violent, it is because they are benefiting from Palestinians being unfree. Period. I am an invited guest here today, and so I can say Free Palestine. I can say Free Palestine as many times as I want to. And because I'm not a student or a teacher or an educator, there's not much that the people who have invited me here today can do.
So violent anti-Semitism is nothing new on campuses. And back, Jessica Felber had an incident in 2007. I got an opportunity to speak with her. And she basically said that things were so bad that she actually brought a lawsuit against UC Berkeley for not only being assaulted and knocked down, but for the blatant disregard of the entire administrative staff for dealing with the blatant anti-Semitism on campus. New Jersey's Rutgers University hosted an Israel-bashing teach-in spewing Hamas propaganda. And believe it or not, they called for not defunding of the college, but defunding of Hillel in particular. A swastika, lightning bolts, and Star of David crossed out with an X was carved into the bathroom wall at American University in Washington, D.C. And of course, it was classified as graffiti by the authorities, not anti-Semitism. And a group of young children at a private school were doing the Nazi salute and yelling anti-Semitic slogans on their soccer field. And these were 7th and 8th graders. Proudly United Education of San Francisco is the first K-12 teachers union to endorse BDS and pass this on to their students. Albert Einstein said the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Proudly, our guests today are not among the do nothing group. Our guests today are those who proudly stand up for anti-Semitism. I'd like to quickly introduce our guests, and that includes Ryan Belrose will be on shortly, and we're going to also have Ron East. Ryan is a Metis from Northern Alberta, an indigenous tribe of Canada, so he understands the plight of the Jews in Israel. Ron East is the publisher and director of Canada's leading pro-Israel news release. Marty Gold's the editor-in-chief of that same paper. And also with us today is Sue-Ann Levy, who's an award-winning conservative investigative reporter, author, columnist, and sought-after commentator. And she's 8-time winner of the Toronto Sun Golden Choice Awards. And Thane Rosenbaum, who's certainly his reputation precedes him. He's a law professor. He is an honored professor. He's written books. He writes articles constantly. And if you get a chance, you should read them. And back to Sue for a moment. Or we'll go to Thane first. Thane's book, Saving Free Speech from Itself, is available now. And I not only have a copy, I have a copy signed to me and my daughters. And Sue's book, Underdog, Confessions of a Right-Wing Gay Jewish Muckraker, is on the shelves and at Amazon right now. So before I introduce our star of the show, Meir, I'd like to thank our guest for being with us tonight. Meir? Take it away.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Going to appeal to everyone who is on their different social media platforms, be it Facebook, be it YouTube, different platforms. If you could please share this with your different platforms that you're on, with your different groups, different pages, we'll reach a lot more people, have a stronger impact. This is a very serious issue. Anti-Semitism under the guise of anti-Zionism being introduced into the public school system. It's running rampant as well on university campuses. When organizations are preaching such anti-Semitism, what follows from that is acts of violence. In the past half year, actually, we've seen an unbelievable rise in attacks, physical attacks against Jews. And those attacks are coming from BDS organizations that love and worship listed terrorist organizations, PFLP, Hamas, just name a couple, the Islamic Jihad as well. Every show that we have, every event that we have, we start off with a few words from the Parsha that we just read in shuls. And the Parsha that we just read in all the shuls throughout the world, here in Toronto, is Parsha's Noach. And there's a lesson in the Parsha. And I'm going to be very brief and connect it to what we're talking about. So it says, after the flood, after Noach saw that the rain stopped, the flood stopped, he went out, and it says, Noach, the man of the earth, debased himself and planted a vineyard. He wanted to have a drink. He had enough of it. He drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, which was one of his sons, the father of Canaan, had a son called Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders, and they walked backwards. They walked backward. They didn't want to see their father in such a state. And covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they saw not their father's nakedness. Noach awoke from his wine and realized what his small son had done to him. That's referring to Ham and his son Canaan. And he said, "Cursed is Canaan." Now, I believe in equality for everyone. Judge everyone right. But there are some realities that are going on that no matter how much you try to treat everyone on a level playing field, unfortunately, for some, it's in one ear and out through the other. We have an issue with the Toronto District School Board that a gentleman, Desmond Cole, was invited to speak. And instead of speaking about issues affecting the Black community, he's very active with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I will say that the Jewish community is on record helping the Black community as much as is possible, expressing all kinds of support for Black organizations. We're there always. The Jewish lawyers were there to help with Mandela when he was in South Africa in prison. We're there. We're there on the front lines always. And when we see a Black leader here in Toronto addressing the Toronto District School Board teachers, espousing anti-Semitism, saying that free Palestine does not mean the destruction of Israel, it means love and peace, and everything's great. And when his followers on Twitter tweet to him messages, and this was uncovered by the Simon Wiedenthal Center, message after message after message that the meaning of free Palestine is the destruction of Israel. The destruction of Israel and support for terror groups. Now, there's a lawyer in Toronto, Michael Tepper. And Michael Tepper has been quite active on top of this issue. And he actually lodged a complaint against, there was an original teacher that was trying to spread this BDS garbage in the school and have it part of the curriculum. So Michael Tepper actually filed a complaint, and he's been in touch with the B'nai B'rith Canada, and B'nai B'rith has assumed responsibility for the complaint. But Michael Tepper, he just sent me an email today, and I'm going to read it. It's brief, and then we'll get on with our other guests to deal with this issue of anti-Semitism on campus and in the public school system, and teachers and high up officials that are endorsing it. Because what's going to happen is that as we see on campus, Jews being beat up by BDS thugs, it's going to happen in the public school system as well. So there's a BDS organization called the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and they're starting a campaign to support Desmond Cole and to support the other teacher that first was trying to really introduce the BDS. So Michael Tepper addressed his letter, his email, to this organization, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. And it's very important that we understand what's going on here. These are the facts. And we'll get into more facts too. So he addresses his letter to Mr. Woodley, who's one of the leaders of this BDS organization. He goes on, first of all, I would like to thank you for your honesty in acknowledging that you had not viewed the whole video of Desmond Cole's presentation to the Toronto District School Board staff prior to sending out your letter of October 8th, 2021. That said, it takes a special kind of chutzpah to write an indignant letter to the TDSB to protest the reaction to Mr. Cole's presentation, when you in fact had not viewed the presentation. Inquiring minds want to know which parts you saw and which parts you didn't, so they can draw their own conclusions about the rational basis for your opinion. Incidentally, I checked out the website for your organization, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and there is this list of your values, one of which is informed, in quotes. Don't speak to an issue if we can't do it intelligently. I wonder how sounding off on a video, which you have only seen partially, squares off with that value. But hey, it's not for me to judge. Next, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Michael Tepper, and I'm just some guy living in Toronto. When I first learned about Javier Davelli's email postings to a TDSB staff mailing list, I got mildly miffed and got a hold of a copy of these emails so I could read them and decide for myself what the fuss was about. The body of the emails was about how the nasty Israeli government, was oppressing the poor Palestinians, and that Canadians should react to this by protesting, writing members of parliament, and participating in a program of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the Israeli government. Ho-hum. Canada is supposed to be a free and democratic country, and Mr. Davila is certainly entitled to his opinion as an individual. I thought it was not quite cricket that he was exploiting his job at the TDSB as a soapbox for his opinion, but I was prepared to let it pass. Then I got to the links at the end of Mr. Davila's emails. Mr. Davila said that he had read most, but not all, of the items he was linking to. I started looking through those, especially the ones he described as, quote, important reads. The first one that caught my attention was an article that Malcolm X published in the Egyptian Gazette on September 17, 1964. It starts off this way. This is what he's linking to. And it goes on. We'll hear about the terror groups as well. The Zionist armies that now occupy Palestine claim their ancient Jewish prophets predicted that in the last days of this world, their own God would raise them up a Messiah who would lead them to their promised land, and they would set up their own divine government in this newly gained land. This, quote, divine government would enable them to rule all other nations with a rod of iron. And it continues. These Israeli Zionists religiously believe their Jewish God has chosen them to replace the outdated European colonialism with a new form of colonialism, so well disguised that it will enable them to deceive the African masses into submitting willingly to their divine authority and guidance without the African masses being aware that they are still colonized. Okay, so the Zionists want to rule all other nations with a rod of iron. Based on leadership from a Messiah, because they were chosen by a Jewish God to engage in a new form of colonialism that will deceive the African masses into submitting willingly to their divine authority and guidance. That sounds kind of anti-Semitic, doesn't it? Not just under the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition, which I understand your organization doesn't like, but under the Jerusalem Declaration of anti-Semitism, which I think you would call fair game. It says, what is particular in classic anti-Semitism is the idea that Jews are linked to forces of evil. There you go, forces of evil. Substitute Jews for Zionists, which is pretty reasonable given how this article keeps carrying on about Jewish prophets and a Jewish God, and on the question of whether this article is anti-Semitic. It's game, set, match. Somehow I thought it was a bit offside for a TDSB student equity program advisor to be promoting that kind of material. I would be interested in learning your view on this particular point. On the next item in Mr. Davila's list of links, it was to a pamphlet published by the New England Committee to Defend Palestine, titled A Short History of Colonization of Palestine. The juicy part is at the end. Palestinians have been legitimately resisting racism, colonization, and genocide since the 1920s to the present day by any means necessary. General strikes, demonstrations, periods of non-cooperation, boycotts of Israeli products and services, refusal to obey military orders, refusal to vacate land, confiscated for settlers, tax revolt, armed struggle, martyrdom operations called suicide bombings by Zionists. That's right, suicide bombing. In the course of doing his job, Mr. Davila sent out a link to a website that says suicide bombings is legitimate. Now that you know this, do you still stand by the CJPME's press release of June 3rd, 2021, in which CJPME stated Davila has done absolutely nothing to justify this discipline action? Either you have to walk that statement back, buddy, or you effectively agree that suicide bombings and similar acts of armed struggle in Israel are okay, like this one. No, this is not just sensationalist gore. It is a photo of not just any terrorist massacre against Israeli Jews, but a very specific one. It's a photo of the November 18, 2014 attack on the Kehilat B'nai Torah synagogue in Har Nof, district of Jerusalem. According to Public Safety Canada, this attack was perpetrated by a group called the PFLP, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Public Safety Canada's website says in 2014, the PFLP claimed responsibility for a November gun and knife attack at an Orthodox Jewish synagogue in West Jerusalem that killed 6 people. Of all the various terrorist attacks against Jews living in Israel, why am I bringing this up? Because Mr. Davila's emails linked to no fewer than 4 websites promoting the PFLP. He links to a website that archives the PFLP's documents to the autobiography of PFLP leader and serial airplane hijacker Leila Khalid, to a movie that praises and glorifies Leila Khalid's terrorist adventures, and to an interview with PFLP founding leader Qassem Kalafani. Again, now you know this. Do you still stand by your statement that Davila has done absolutely nothing wrong to justify this disciplinary action? The email goes on. I think you get the gist. There are links that are, they're not hiding anything. Links, and they're proud of these terrorist organizations. They consider them liberation organizations, no matter how gruesome the terrorist attacks have been. And you have, Desmond Cole, by the way, was paid $16,000 by the TDSB to make his revolting presentation to them. I've reached out to him to see if we could have a conversation. I've reached out to him, asking him if he could even be a guest on the show. And I have not heard back one word at all. But as I said with the Parsha, when I went on about the Parsha, that the sons were different. Shem, Yosef, and Ham, totally different. And the Torah comes down like that. So you treat everybody as equal as you can. But in the end, there are some people that you can't have a reasonable discussion with. Their objectives, what they want, and the BDS, and that's how they are. They're with blinders, and they are fixated on that anything goes when it comes to their ultimate goal of destroying the Jewish state. We have a lot of people joining us today, and our doctor in the studio can select. I'm not sure who's going to, what
Well, I
order that
think
we have
what
here.
we'll do is, so nobody thinks I'm playing favorites. We'll do it in the order that people signed on and got the link. So first, we're going to give Thane an opportunity to respond and to speak. This is Thane Rosenbaum from New York.
Hello, everyone. Well, one thought, I'm in New York and not in Toronto, so I did not know this story, but it's not surprising in any way. First of all, I assume that, is it Desmond Cole? Is that his name?
Yes.
You'll notice he is not an Islamist. He's not a Muslim. He's not Palestinian. He's not from the Middle East. So why is he having this conversation? This actually is sort of the agenda of the progressive left. It's the perfect embodiment of intersectionality. All groups, marginalized groups, all minorities, all gender categories, all share a common oppressor. And it's a white person, and Jews are considered part of the privileged power structures of white America or white Canada or white Israel, even though half of Israelis are people of color, which gets completely ignored. So you see this strategy used again and again, where the people arguing the Palestinian BDS argument are not actually themselves people who are directly affected. They're part of the intersectional category of all of our enemies are a common enemy. And so even though he speaks from a position of absolute ignorance, which is why you won't get him on your station, you won't get him because, you know, there's some real factual problems, you know, in making these accusations against Israel. Apartheid obviously is not an Israeli construct. Jews and Arabs sit in restaurants together. They travel on public accommodations together. An Ethiopian woman was Miss Israel. There have been 3 Arab justices on the Supreme Court. An Arab party presently serves in the coalition government. This is an insult to South African blacks that experience apartheid. It has nothing to do with this. Genocide, ethnic cleansing. Well, you know, people on your program should always say the following thing. I think it startles people when you say, this is a good conversation starter. Did you realize that the Palestinian population has more than doubled since the quote occupation? Really, more than doubled. And yet the words ethnic cleansing are being used against Palestinians? Really? How is that possible? Ask any Armenian or Rwandan or Congolese or anyone who is a Bosnian who has actually experienced genocide, and you'll know that genocide is an example of subtraction of your population, not a doubling. So these words are just sort of casually stated. You know, it's really very Orwellian. You hear words, you know, like, for instance, Black Lives Matter's focus on critical race theory, right? They'll always say, well, it's really about history, teaching history. Well, no, it's not. Because if it's not as if, you know, the United States or Canada doesn't teach the history of slavery and Jim Crow, say in the United States, or lingering racism that still persists. The focus isn't on history. The focus is on power and privilege. And the power and privilege comes from the white person. You'll notice in the clip that you showed of Desmond Cole, he used the word, the only reason people object to Free Palestine is because they benefit from the privilege. Notice that use of the word. Notice how he used it. I mean, he's ignorant. I don't know if he's hateful. He's clearly just ignorant and is reading from a script. But he used the word benefiting from privilege because the argument that you're hearing is that all inequality is not colorblind. In other words, it's a rejection of everything Martin Luther King ever said. The argument seems to be that All decisions result from skin color. And the reason why people of color have not achieved at a different level can only be for one reason. It's not about work ethic. It's not about talent or merit. These things are ultimately considered part of the white power structure system that needs to be dismantled. The dismantling of the laws, the defunding of the police, right? This whole argument is against everything that liberalism stands for: the protection of property, equal protection under the law, free speech, the valuing of talent and individual merit. What you hear now in the words equity is really just another way of arguing that if there is inequity, it can only be for one reason only: the leveraging of white power over and oppressing people of color. So that's why what you're seeing, and then I'll move on, we'll move on to another guest, is this very bizarre idea that anti-Semitism is legitimized as an example of human rights, that you can actually argue anti-Semitism is necessary in order to advance the human rights of people of color, right? And it's just sort of shocking, right? This total Orwellian, the not just the misapplication, but the pernicious destruction of language by using language the exact opposite of what it means. Anti-Semitism has become a human rights issue. And those people that hate Jews obviously are expressing their value for people of color. And again, that's why they always speak of Israel as a settler colonial enterprise. They always speak as Israelis as if they all came from Toronto or Brooklyn, right? They don't want to speak. I'm sure if you talk to Desmond Cole, that's what he would say, out of ignorance. Someone said that Desmond Cole I just saw someone wrote, oh, right. I'm sorry. I thought they said is a Rhodes Scholar. No, I mean, I was going to say there's no way. I mean, he's an imbecile. And that's why you won't get him on this stage, and you would never get him to debate someone who has real knowledge and would actually, reveal the distortions in what he says. Remember again what he said, right? If you only reason you would object to Free Palestine is not because it's a genocidal movement to eliminate Jews in Israel. No, that's not the reason. It's not because Jews have a historic connection to that ancestral homeland. No, it's because you're a white person and you want white people to benefit from Israel because Israel is a white nation. That's essentially what they're saying. It's the classic intersectional canard. You've heard this on college campuses. You are now seeing it in public schools, and it's getting worse and worse with each day, largely because people won't confront it. People won't stand up to it. So I applaud you for devoting this program to this issue.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to bring on now the second person who chimed in, which is Sue-Ann Levy, and we'll keep Thane on the screen if he wants to at the end of her commentary. Wade in again. So Sue?
Hi there. And first of all, I'm not live in Oshawa. That was from when I covered Aaron O'Toole's, I guess you would not say victory party. It was more like a wake. Anyway, so yes, I've been following this story, and I'm intimate with Desmond Cole, not in any sort of manner you want to think, but I know the gentleman very well. And he is no gentleman. He is actually evil, and he's dangerous in my view. And he has been involved in sort of Black Lives Matter activism for many, many years. The thing that concerns me is that the Toronto District School Board, on the heels of the Javier Davila debacle, and I call it debacle because, yes, I broke the story, and then I was harassed, made the subject of petitions, and stalked for a number of weeks after the story appeared, and then I did follow-ups. I was bullied on Twitter. The unions went after me in a big way. The unions are, I think, vehemently or virulently anti-Semitic. They've all passed BDS motions. Many of the unions, the usual suspects, as we say. The problem is that it's twofold. So you've got Javier Davila, then you've got Desmond Cole putting him up as a hero. It's aside from what Thane said, and he was very eloquent about it, the critical race theory, the intersectionality issue. The problem is that at the Toronto School Board, and I see this in municipal government, I see it in many school boards, is that this is their time. This is their time for the regressive left. And you've got activists running school boards. The education director at the Toronto School Board is a Black woman. She makes no bones about the fact that she's involved in oppression and anti-racism issues. She hasn't been involved with Black Lives Matter or supports them. I was able to find that out. And then you've got a series of people who are promoted based on their perceived activism, and many of them Black. And, you know, that's not to say that there shouldn't be equality, there shouldn't be diversity. The problem is that, as was pointed out to me, the Black population at the Toronto District School Board is probably in the neighborhood of about, 10%. But the people running the school board, the leadership team are represent Black population probably about 30 or 40%. So they're overrepresented at the senior level. These people are not informed about Israel. They're not informed about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism issues. They're, I would say, downright ignorant. And they're doing everything that Thane has mentioned, you know, pushing the anti-oppression, the anti-racism. They all speak in the name of that. Problem is that they're throughout the school boards now in leadership positions. They're allowing, by not disciplining Javier Davila, they're enabling the continuation of anti-Semitism. And I've been told by people inside the board that it's never been as bad as it is now. Little wonder. And the other problem is that we've got alleged Jewish advocacy groups who don't advocate. Who, when I broke the Javier Davila story, very few organizations jumped on the bandwagon to call him out, to call the anti-Semitism at the school board. It's like shush still. They want to bury, hide it under the carpet, sweep it under the rug, so to speak. And, I was appalled that not, I think B'nai B'rith spoke out, but I was appalled that not many Jewish organizations spoke out. And then they allow it to fester, continue to fester within the board. And then you've got Desmond Cole appearing. And what will it be next? And this is the thing that really, really concerns me. And this is why there is a rise in anti-Semitism. We have enemies within. I'll tell you one more story, and then I'm going to, a couple of years ago, a synagogue that some people call a church in Toronto, very well-heeled people, very social justice oriented, very left, in 2017 actually had Desmond Cole come and speak. It came to my attention, and being a ballsy kind of broad, I wrote the rabbi and I said, how dare you? How dare you have this young man come and speak? It was around the time his book came out. And she wrote me all kinds of things about, he assured me he's not with the Black Lives Matter movement. He's not anti-Semitic. How do you know? How do you know? But, we had an interchange and she wasn't going to back down. When this happened at the school board and Desmond Cole said what he said and actually dissed me as well, I sent her a copy of the link. And I said, well, I'm not trying to prove that I'm right, but 4 years ago, you told me he wasn't anti-Semitic. To me, this is proof that he is. Well, I wrote that email about, I guess, a week ago. I haven't heard back, and I probably won't. So, this is the enemy within. These are people who think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. They're emboldening evil, anti-Semitic people like Desmond Cole. And I'll just pass it back to you, Meir or Thane, whatever you.
Interesting on your point. I brought it up the last time we had a discussion about this, that Bernie Farber, who was the former CEO of the Canadian Jewish Congress, now at CJA, that he had an event. He was either the director or the high-level figure with an organization called the Mosaic Institute. They put together a panel. On the panel, they had Desmond Cole, Karen Mock, that heads the Canadian equivalent of J Street, J Space, and they also had a representative or a leader of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. And why it's relevant is that the National Council of Canadian Muslims has been promoting and endorsing Desmond Cole, what this whole issue is about that we're talking about right now. And on their social media, they are also saying free Palestine, justifying the BDS. And, when you have a former CEO of the Canadian Jewish Congress that's right up there and sitting next to Desmond Cole, without taking issue to any of his positions that I consider to be anti-Semitic. And his followers have said that the code word free Palestine means the destruction of Israel. And it goes
just like
out for the other. This is very dangerous. And then when the Toronto District School Board reaches out to CJA and says they would like CJA to start working with the NCCM, National Council of Canadian Muslims, on this issue. But they might as well just come straight up and say, just work with the group that calls itself the BDS and doesn't hide behind some other respectable sounding name.
I just want to make one point, Meir. It infiltrates into the media as well. Okay, so the mainstream media isn't covering this issue. At my former at Post Media, I covered it intensely, but no other mainstream media did. And add insult to injury, last Friday, for example, 640 Toronto, I used to be on that station. It used to be a conservative station. Their morning guy, Greg Brady, who came from sports, has no knowledge whatsoever about the Middle East, I would venture to say, and is probably uninformed, ignorant. He had Desmond Cole on, and Desmond Cole went full throttle, with his anti-Semitic and anti-Israel tropes. He was allowed to do this. This is what's happening because the mainstream media feels they have to cover these oppression issues. They have to be woke, but they're opening a really, really, dangerous, I can't begin to say. It's, they're uninformed and they let activists, evil, dangerous activists like him because they can't respond. If Greg Brady, for example, knew anything about Israel, knew anything about the Middle East, he would stop him, but he didn't. And this is what's happening in the mainstream media.
Right. Okay, so our doctor in the studio is going to bring on another one of our guests.
Well, right before we bring on the guests, I just wanted to, you mentioned earlier the person who did combat Desmond Cole's claiming that free Palestine does not mean destruction of Israel. So I just want to give her a little credit because she's another one who doesn't just sit around and let things happen. This is Jamie Roberts, who gave me permission to use her information during our show. And basically her work focuses on hate crime, racist, anti-Semitic, extremist groups, hate propaganda, advocacy. So after Desmond Cole claimed that free Palestine does not mean the destruction of Israel, she basically went up against him. And what he said was, Desmond said on his Twitter page, which is Negro Frolic Say Free Palestine. That's his claim. He said some people have said Free Palestine meant the destruction of Israel. Who said that, laugh out loud? Cite your sources, Shirley. I don't know if Shirley is him or he means Shirley you jest. But anyway, Jamie responded with her own saying, okay, so who feels that way? So just a couple of examples of the followers of Desmond Cole. Okay, so the followers said in reference to that, I said it, death to Israel and everyone else that supports them. These are Desmond's followers. Someone said proudly, me bitch, I'm the source. Someone else said, but why not? We can keep going on and on. I'll just show you a couple of samples before we invite Ron and Marty to join us. But me, I say that. She's perfectly what we mean, Shirley. I too have said that. Israel exists through occupation, apartheid. Palestine means coexistence of a settled colony or something? Of course not. This one was very proud. Wait, what? What else would it mean? Death to all genocidal apartheid settler colonist states. That should not. And these people are proud because they're putting this out in social media. It's not like they're saying this casually in a conversation. They're proud to say, yes, Desmond, we mean the destruction of Israel. Me, I said that. Death to Israel, says Nora. Or the bedtime abolition now. Free Palestine isn't a metaphor. The literal death of the settler colony regime. Armed resistance is required. Yes, destruction. Why is Free Palestine in display, you ugly MF? This Palestinian says we will be destroying Israel in the most violent ways imaginable. And I find it hard to believe that Desmond did not know that these were his followers. He does. And it's, being ignorant and uninformed is one thing. Being a blatant liar in the press is something totally different. And just wanted to say that one of the big problems we're facing now is we know on college campuses this has been the case. We know it's also infiltrated, high schools. Well, these are some examples of recent findings on public school systems. In California, a desktop. In Queens, New York, where I'm from. In Minnesota. In Toronto. In British Columbia. In Atlanta. So this is infiltrated from colleges where the professors are preaching this, down to high schools and now in elementary schools. So with those lovely comments, I'm going to invite on first, we'll have Ron join us, say a few words, and Marty will join us next. Ron, take it away.
Thanks very much. I'm quite honored to be on the show and to be amongst such a distinguished panel. I think one thing I'd like to mention is something that I call laundering hate. And that's actually what's happening here, legitimizing hate. And the way it works is you take somebody like a Desmond Cole, or for that matter, anybody here in Winnipeg, it was Les Rothberg from If Not Now, and you give them a legitimate platform where they can come and speak. And the minute you give them that legitimate platform where they come and speak, they become legitimate. It's even better if that legitimate space is a Jewish space, like Sue-Ann Levy was mentioning about that synagogue that first brought in Desmond Cole, because now you legitimize him within a Jewish perspective. And then how can you call him an anti-Semite or to say he hates Jews if you legitimize him? And once you legitimize him, now he's legitimate in the media, he's legitimate everywhere. And it's just like laundering money, but they're laundering hate. And they've learned how to do it, and they've perfected it. It's like the Trojan horse. Universities were the first place that they came in with that Trojan horse. Now it's high schools. I can tell you from my son's personal experience in junior high that it's already in the junior high level. And very soon it'll be also in the elementary level. My son in grade 7, 8, and 9 was told that he should go back into the oven, that they will finish what Hitler started. And the things that my son heard, the vile anti-Semitism that he had to deal with here in Winnipeg at his school was revolting. So Toronto is no different from Winnipeg. There are teachers here in Winnipeg and members of staff at a variety of different school divisions that have no problem going on their social media accounts, on their Twitter accounts, and out there in the open saying, this is what I do within the school. I teach about the Israeli oppression. I teach about Palestinian rights. I teach about these things. And you know what? Our federation here in Winnipeg does nothing about it. Zero, nothing. You know what they do? They walk with Black Lives Matter on a Friday night through Winnipeg to show support. But when they have to stand up against Linda Sarsour on a Saturday, they said they can't do it because it's against Shabbat. But to walk with Black Lives Matter on a Friday night, that's quite all right. Tells you quite a bit, and I'll let Marty jump in.
Okay, thank you, Ron.
Well, I'm glad that our favorite topics, the useless Jewish Federation of Winnipeg, has come up. I just want to go back for a moment to some of the things that were said earlier. The reference to Shirley in Desmond Cole's tweet was actually to an official of the school board who had challenged him in one of those first two sessions. And so that was Shirley Chan, who had explained that Free Palestine in certain circles is interpreted to mean the destruction of Israel. And he was baiting her. He was taunting her. And that is how he got, how Desmond Cole got, in essence, trapped by and again, is it ignorance? Is it a blind spot? Did he? I don't know what he thought the result was going to be when you're looking for support from anti-Semites, that they're suddenly not going to show their true colors. So this wasn't just a throwaway term he used. He was directly challenging one of these hosts, not at the time, which is fair game in the context of the debate that they were having, the discussion they were trying to have with their guest, but after the fact, because this guy is an unrepentant racist. He's an unrepentant ideologue. He is an unrepentant supporter of Jew hate. And he has, there's been no attempt, and again, I'm not in Toronto. I've relied to some extent on Sue Ann's reporting in particular to fill in some of the holes, the details of what has actually gone on. And yet it doesn't appear to me that anybody has challenged this guy directly. God knows if anybody's asked to have equal time on that radio program. That used to be the convention. Sue Ann is correct. Alleged, what was the term used? Alleged Jewish advocacy organizations continue to use the Shah Shteel approach, that they don't want to rock the boat. And in fact, they're lining themselves up to basically be capos with clipboards to check off the names. They aren't taking a stand because they fear repercussions, because they are cowards. We here at the J.ca do not fear anybody, least of all Desmond Cole. The response that I've gotten to the two columns I've written has been very gratifying. There's been no legitimate pushback. Nobody's been able to say anything that I've written, much the same as Sue Ann. Nothing that we've written as basically the only two journalists in the country that are covering this issue. Nobody's been able to say that anything we've written is out of context, is factually incorrect, is lacking in perspective. I agree with Ron also that, and I thought of this, I didn't put it in either of the columns so far, but if this happened in Winnipeg, the Jewish Federation would shit themselves. They would have absolutely no idea what to do. They would be pressured from the left not to say anything, because God forbid you insult some activist, and they'd be pressured from real Jews, from Zionists, who don't think it's a good idea to let people flap their gums and talk about organizations, talk about movements that would slaughter us all like sheep in the streets. So if it sounds like I'm kind of motivated about this subject, I am. If I think that the Jewish community needs, that this should be an awakening, especially for the Jewish community in Toronto. Again, it's easy for me to say as an outsider, but if the Jewish parents don't act, and I don't mean talk, I mean act. They have to act directly. These accusations that were included in my columns, that the Jewish trustees were somehow, and the Jewish school board officials, that they're somehow influenced not by a sense of right and wrong, but by a sense of Jews sticking together, is reprehensible. And yet you have these officials carrying on, and as Ron said, there's this this legitimization. So you've got school board officials in the education field in Ontario that throw each other. They aren't even lifelines. I mean, basically, they just pump up each other's tires all the time. And so you've got Debbie Casvin opening her big mouth. You've got Javier Davila feeling invincible. And you've got Desmond Cole walking around with a sense that he is untouchable. The Jewish community in Toronto has to deal with all three of these characters. And that's before we get the superintendent of education, about whom I think Sue Ann talks with a guy named, I think it's a male, named Bird, I think it is, from the school board. They aren't responding to my inquiries. Maybe they'll respond to you about the role of this principal who spoke out, went on Twitter, supported everything that Desmond Cole did. What a slap in the face to the officials, to the school board officials or fellow employees who got an apology from the school board. And here's this dame saying, oh, nothing wrong here. Desmond Cole should do more of the same. It's disgraceful.
I'll just jump in here.
Having this.
I'll just jump in here because I called that woman out. She was a superintendent, actually, which is even scarier. And
yeah,
she said that it was very enlightening. But here goes back to the problem that people are being promoted to positions just because of their, I hate to say it, just because of their activism, their skin color, their wokeness. And this is what I'm hearing over and over and over again. And not because of competency or understanding. And they shouldn't even be touching these subjects. I mean, I maybe I'm old fashioned, but I thought you went to school to learn how to read, write, spell, actually craft.
Yeah, but when the Marxist activists take over education in the universities and they drill this into teachers, they drill this into librarians. Okay, that's one of the biggest problems, is how this has infiltrated the mentality, the role and function of librarians in this country. I'm speaking specifically those employed in the school system, because they will guide kids towards this woke agenda. And when we as a society seeded the education system, this was where the Marxists, this is where the Jew haters dug trenches. And to dislodge that is going to be very difficult, but it's entirely necessary. And what you're referring to, Sue-Ann, the promotion of these characters, these kinds of characters, not on the basis of achievement, not on the basis of measured metrics of accomplishment, but on the basis of, they lead, that superintendent of education. Sue-Ann, do you recall what her role was in the school division prior to taking over as superintendent of education? Is Allison Games San Vicente?
She was a principal, but I mean, they're all involved in alleged diversity and activism and anti-oppression. If you look at their resumes, you look at them on LinkedIn, it's all the same. And it's like talking into a channel where they just reverberate their same, position in life.
And it's a very damaging worldview.
Yeah.
Because it divides the world into oppressors and victims.
It's an echo chamber of their own making. And unfortunately, when Javier Davila's issue came up, the school board interim director was actually Jewish or married to a Jew, and she had some understanding. Well, she got caught in the middle of this other person coming in, Colleen. I'm going to name her because I think she's going to be very dangerous for the board. Colleen Russell Rollins. And she has, her claim to fame is she's been involved in anti-oppression, diversity issues for the last, umpteen years. She went to the Peel District School Board for a year as an interim director because, of course, they got caught with, being accused of being anti-Black, where the former education director was. He came in to sort of clean up things. Now, I heard that there was a real mess there. And some people have actually said, thank goodness she's gone back to the Toronto District School Board. But see, these people get recycled based on their oppression credentials, not because they're competent. And the way she handled this whole thing with Desmond Cole was appalling. I asked Ryan Bird, who's the spokesperson, you can never get near to any of these people. I asked, is she going to apologize to Jewish students, Jewish principals, people who have been appalled by his behavior? And he said, well, she made an apology already. Well, I don't know. I didn't call that an apology. It was not an apology at all.
Well, again, this is where the parents, in my opinion, with kids in the district, have to stand up. They have to confront the school trustees. I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of how these things are aligned in Toronto. I assume it's basically the same as it is here. But the parents, it seems to me, they shouldn't be relying on Michael Tepper to carry their water. The parents themselves have to be far more vocal and far more mobilized. And if it's not going to be under the leadership of the Jewish Federation, then in Toronto, it has to be under the leadership it doesn't even need to be under leadership, but it helps when there is leadership. It helps when there are resources accorded to these people.
Well,
and some coordination and some signal boosting, and it seems to me that is the next step. If the Jews in Toronto actually care what's being taught in public schools, maybe they need to pull their kids out of public school. But I don't know that that's really a viable alternative for most of those families.
some of them do, but back with Javier Davila, the way to get him, or way to have gotten him, was to lodge a complaint with the Ontario College of Teachers. Now, I understand that was supposed to have happened, that the school board, basically because they're so unionized and they're so protected, the school board allegedly couldn't get rid of them. I disagree. So the complaint should have been with the Ontario College of Teachers. Do you think that any of them stepped up to the plate, any of the Jewish organizations? Interestingly enough, they were trying to get me to make a complaint. I'm a journalist. I don't make complaints to the Ontario College of Teachers about someone I've written about.
There's some of it is trepidation, some of it is outright cowardice. If people are in a leadership position, they aren't stepping forward, they aren't speaking out, that's cowardice. Among the parents, it could be trepidation, but they don't have any time to waste. I've spent, like yourself, Sue-Ann, many hours in piecing together the elements of what is going on here, who the characters are, who the players are, what's been said, what's been done, and what the implications are. There's a role for journalists, but that role stops at where the classroom starts. That's where the parents, and I think presumably the Jewish teachers who have the misfortune of being employed in such an environment, that's where they have to take a stand, and it has to be a strong stand. And it has to go right to the Minister of Education's office as well. Nobody's talked about the Ontario government's role in all of this, and they definitely have one. And the Ford government should be ashamed of themselves that they are funding such an absolute insult to the Jewish population of Ontario.
Hey guys, let me put off for 1 second. Sorry to interrupt. I'm going to let Thane say. Thane needs to leave, so I'm going to let Thane get in and say a closing comment. Marty, then I'm going to put you right back on the screen. So Thane, we really appreciate you being here with us today. So why don't you close with a couple of comments, and then we'll bid you adieu till next time. So here's Thane closing out his comments.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you for letting me participate. And I really enjoyed hearing from Sue-Ann and Marty's exchange, and Ron as well. Let me just say something in response to something Marty had said when he said something about Desmond Cole having free reign. And I think it's important to think about why he has free reign. It's not just for the structural reasons people inviting him. It has a lot to do with the fact that I'm almost shocked that we've been on an hour on Facebook Live and that we haven't been shut down. This, in the category of the progressive left, in the world of intersectionality and wokeism and critical race theory, this is a racist conversation. Virtually everything we've said. And to question the intelligence of a man of color, like I called him an imbecile. It's a racist act. It's categorically racist. We live in a new society where, again, the values of liberalism are completely being rejected, whether it's anything that is considered that keeps the present white power structure in power is considered by definition white supremacy. White supremacy has nothing to do with a few white supremacists. It has to do with liberalism. It's an attack on the protection of property, the value, the sanctity of the home and intact families, the value of individual merit, free speech, equal protection under the law. That's what these people are going after. They use Orwellian speak like privilege to confuse you, but that's not what this is about. What the biggest protection that Desmond Cole has, which is so ironic because Martin Luther King looked for colorblind equality. But in this present environment, what we're really told is that all decisions are reflected in skin color, and the disparate impact is only because of prejudice and bias and racism. And so there are now these new protected classes that under the rubric of intersectionality are being told that everyone should listen to you and be respectful because you're a person of color. And being a person of color grants you automatic virtue. And being a person who is white automatically consigns you to evil. And so I am glad that we were able to have this civil conversation. But it's so much of me was listening to what was said, and I was shocked because I know that on any university campus, that at the New York Times, everything that was said here right today was considered racist, and it's done in a reflexive way. It's automatic. You couldn't even defend yourself. You know, there's nothing to defend. Make it to mock Desmond Cole, to call attention to his scholarly errors, to contradict him in any way, which is what Marty and Sue Ann were doing, is just, you know, categorically racist. And again, think of what I just said at the beginning. Notice who becomes Canadian's single biggest defender of Palestinian rights, a Canadian, an African Canadian. It's right out of the intersectional playbook. And it's almost genius. It's almost genius that this is the person who stands for Palestinian rights and a guy who can openly call for the destruction and killing of Jews in Israel and actually being considered that that's actually a human rights argument and not a genocidal argument. Thank you for including me.
Thane, before you go, you know, you just mentioned something that reminded me. Here in Winnipeg on May 15th, there was a huge anti-Israel protest by pro-Palestinian activists. And, you know, here in Winnipeg, I run the grassroots version of Meir here in Winnipeg. So we put together right away a group of us to go out there and counter-protest. You know, when we got there, you know, they were supposed to be in vehicles. We were supposed to be on the side of the street. For 2 weeks, we were you know, doing this negotiation between the police and us and the Palestinian side to make sure there'll be no confrontation, no nothing. We kept to our end of the bargain. Of course, the Palestinian side did not. They got out of their cars, marched down the streets to confront us. The police were unprepared, overmatched, overpowered. You know, in the process of all this, you know, they were telling us how they were going to rape our women, you know, rape my daughters, how they were going to stab us in the middle of the streets. They burned our flags. They threw bottles and stones at us, did all this stuff. And why am I telling you this? Because at the end of the day, when CBC decided to do a story about this, who did they interview? They interviewed a 19-year-old Palestinian who they claimed was the lady who organized, you know, their protest. This beautiful, innocent-looking 19-year-old girl, you know, claimed, look at these Jews, these horrible Zionists. Look at them, poor me, poor me. Nobody came to our side. Nobody interviewed us because look at me. I don't look like a 19-year-old, you know, girl who's poor me, poor me. And the whole thing got, you know, completely contorted and twisted, you know, from what the reality was. And I agree with you. They play the game very well. They know exactly who to put in front of the cameras. They know exactly who to throw in front. Look at food vendors. Look at Kim from Food Vendors. It's a whole different discussion. But again, a non-Palestinian, a white woman, you know, and she's now the torchbearer, you know, for pro-Palestinians in Canada and for fighting against Zionism. It's crazy.
Ron, I just
goodbye,
say,
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just want to say that there's actually very selective because I'm, you know, gay, openly gay, married, but I'm white and I'm Jewish. So I don't know if that cancels, you know, I don't know what boxes I have to check, but, you know, maybe I need to be biracial, but I'm not. So, you know, that's the problem. I'm Jewish and I'm white. And just to respond to that sort of thing, Desmond Cole was allowed at the school board to stand up and say, I'm the most dangerous columnist in Canada, and that I targeted Javier Davila, as if I actually went, and he had a bullseye on his back, and I actually went after him because I hated him. He produced anti-Semitic manuals, but I targeted him. And everybody sat there. Nobody said anything. Everybody's afraid to speak up. You talked about the teachers. The teachers, Jewish teachers, are just terrified. are just terrified to be targeted. I heard from a lot of them during the Javier Davila incident, or tobacco, whatever you want to call it. And they would give me stuff behind the scenes, but they're targeted on social media. They're targeted on teachers' platforms. There's a very vocal minority group, unionized, who are anti-Semitic and openly anti-Semitic.
Imagine a teacher, Jewish teacher in the Toronto public school district putting up an Israeli flag in their classroom, versus a teacher who puts a Palestinian flag in the classroom. Guess which teacher is going to be told to remove their flag and be accused of racism, and which teacher will be looked at as a hero, for putting up their flag? It says a lot about where we are in the state we're in. But you know what? Anti-Semitism is the world's oldest virus, and with COVID-19, here comes anti-Semitism. But the thing that bothers me the most is that now as Jews, as soon as you stand up for Judaism, as soon as you say that's anti-Semitic, as soon as you say, hey, that's not right, that's anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, you're right away accused of being some kind of racist or a white extremist. And now now as Jews even, we can no longer be proud and try to stand up and defend our own Judaism, because by defending my own Judaism, I'm somehow being seen as being against something else. And it's so warped and dangerous. And that's what a lot of people aren't recognizing. You're talking about teachers at their work. I can tell you in my own place to work. I'd be afraid to stand up for Israel. I'd be afraid to say something, for the repercussions that might come out of it, because in my work, there's a large segment of the people who work there who come from Arab, countries. And if I would stand up and I would say something, there's a fear that's involved there. So, and then I think it speaks for a lot of people, in the workforce. You're afraid nowadays to stand up for Israel because that seems to something negative and something wrong. You have somebody waiting, I think, in the audience there, Meir.
What's that?
Someone in the audience wants to ask a question, I think.
Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
we have a live audience.
Also, if there's people phone in, we do have a number, 647-510-535. If you have any questions, concerns, you can call on the screen, call. We have somebody by the phones to answer, and we'll take your questions as well. Okay, so any question, yeah, you could come up to here.
Just come up and step on the X.
What's your name?
My name is Mike Tepper.
Okay, very good. Okay.
So I thought I'd introduce myself.
Hey, Mike.
Sue Ann mentioned earlier in this program that she wasn't aware who, if any, had complained to the OCT about Mr. Davila's materials. And I thought I'd identify myself as someone who did complain within a week of the fact that they were published. And I took that position not primarily on account of anything being anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, because that's not something I can definitively prove. What I can prove is that Mr. Davila's materials contained links to websites promoting the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a designated terrorist entity according to Public Safety Canada. And that, I believe, is conduct unbecoming a member of the Ontario College of Teachers. Yesterday, there was an open letter to the TDSB written by Mr. Woodley from the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. And I took the liberty of responding to Mr. Woodley. And I don't know if you'd permit me to read some extracts from this letter if I'm taking too much time.
I read some before, but you could go ahead.
First of all, I wanted to thank Mr. Woodley for his honesty in acknowledging that you had not viewed the whole video of Desmond Cole's presentation to the TDSB staff prior to sending out your letter of October 8th, 2021. That being said, it takes a special kind of chutzpah to write an indignant letter to the TDSB to protest the reaction to Mr. Cole's presentation when you in fact had not viewed the whole presentation. Inquiring minds want to know which part you saw and which part you didn't, so they can draw their own conclusions about the rational basis for your opinion. Incidentally, I checked out the website for your organization, and there is this list of the CGMPE's values, one of which is so-called informed. Don't speak to an issue if we can't do it intelligently. Now, I wonder how sounding off on a video, which you've only seen partially, squares off with that so-called value, but hey, it's not for me to judge. So at the end of Mr. Woodley's letter to the board, he asks for 4 action items. And I came up with a list of action items of my own. The first one is that his organization ought to issue an apology to B'nai B'rith Canada, the Center for Jewish and Israel Affairs, and the Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center for how they've all been mistreated by CJMPE, and for him to clarify that condoning terrorism is in fact hate speech. The second is that his organization should publicly articulate its full denunciation of propaganda that promotes acts of terror and murder against Israeli civilians. The third is that his organization should remove from its website material that it has produced, which falsely endorses so-called educational materials which link to anti-Semitic content. And the fourth one is that his organization ought to abandon its plans to smear representative organizations of Canada's Jewish community about the creation of resources about Israel and Palestine, and instead review the capacity of its own executive team to represent these issues in a measured and comprehensive way. And I would note that those are actually a direct inversion of his own action items. That's all I have to say at the moment.
Did you get a response back?
No, sir. But it's only been a few hours. We'll see what happens in the coming week. I'll keep everyone informed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sue Ann, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I'm thanking Mike for making that complaint. I was curious to know where it was at. You know, the problem is that the school board has emboldened Javier, and he is continuing with his, you know, he calls it activism, but I dare say that he's not concerned about oppression in any other country. You know, and that's the definition of anti-Semitism. I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree that when you're obsessed with Israel to the, you know, exclusion of other countries that have human rights abuses, China for one. Look at how they kept those poor men, the 2 Michaels, imprisoned for how long? 2 years? Then, you know, we've got a problem.
You know, when Christians are being slaughtered in Nigeria to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of thousands, on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, where hundreds of churches have been burned to the ground, where schools have been destroyed, where entire communities have been, you know, ripped from their place, where you've got such tremendous human rights violations, and yet you don't see any one of these people try to stand up, you know, and raise awareness about something that is happening in the world that's really, really horrible. You know, same in China with the Chinese and what they're doing to the Muslim community within China. We can look at what's happening with the Taliban in Afghanistan right now. We can look at Iran. We can look at Lebanon. I mean, I can list you on and on and on and on. You know, one of the ridiculous things in the world is that the Taliban is now seeking to be recognized as the official representative of the UN in the UN of Afghanistan, which then gives them a seat, you know where? And the Women's Rights Council. I mean, this is how absurd the world is, right? They're going to get a seat to be at the table to make decisions on behalf of the global world on issues relating to women's rights, at the same time as they are the biggest abusers of women's rights. And yet people will tell you that Israel, you know, is the world's, you know, the crux of the world's, you know, problems, and the Jews, you know, are the issue. and that's just what anti-Semitism is. It doesn't need logic, it doesn't need facts, it doesn't need truth. That's what I've said to my kids about wokeism. They've asked me, what's going on right now? Explain to me that. And I tell them wokeism doesn't need, facts and truth. It's all about opinions and feelings. And one thing that's very difficult to combat is somebody's opinions and feelings. So it's your own feelings and your own opinions. And when somebody just wants to go with that, you can't argue with them because they don't want to listen to facts. So somebody like Desmond Cole will not care about the facts you're going to give him because he's about feelings and about, opinions.
And indoctrinating. Let's not forget indoctrinating. So,
that's why they're going after the kids.
The sad, and you talked about parents not being there, but the sad thing is I've covered one too many anti-Israel protests to count. And I was at one, I still remember, last year during the height of COVID restrictions, this group blocked Yonge and Bloor Street. They were virulently anti-Israel. In fact, they tried to get me thrown out, the organizers. Police told them, bug off. And they were spewing anti-Semitic tropes nonstop. And I actually saw young ladies who looked Jewish there. So where the hell are their parents? These kids are indoctrinated. They want to be woke. And this is the problem with, our community, whether it's Winnipeg or Toronto. Parents aren't keeping an eye on what's going on. Parents want to shush still. They don't want to make waves. They don't want to, they're entitled. There's a lot of entitlement involved. And it sickens me that our community allows this to happen.
This goes also into the.
We have another audience member who has a question.
Alex? Okay. Number one, I have a question that basically really it's a legal question. Desmond Cole talks about Black Lives Matter, but he stated also at the same time that all lives matter is racist. What that tells me is that the Canadian Constitution and the Canadian Charter rights no longer apply, because according to the Charter rights, all of us are equal. So based on what Desmond Cole says, that seems to be the case. So I would like to know officially what is the totem pole? Who's at the top? Who's in the middle? Who's at the bottom? And furthermore, I also have a question for Desmond. Like, he's talking about or complaining about racism against the blacks, but then he doesn't talk about the fact that today, as we speak, there are places where there is black slavery. There's black slave markets in Libya, Mauritania, and some other countries. How come he's not talking about that one? And he's talking about endemic past racism. How come he doesn't talk about the Ottoman Empire, which, of course, the Turks were not Caucasian, not white, but they had white slaves, like the harem girls were all white. They were originally Christian white girls that were put into basically sex slaves. That's
okay, so we got your question. Okay, so Marty, did you hear the question or statement?
I'm not sure I got a question quite.
They were all questions.
In terms of what
but
this is the typical tactic. I just had a chance to look up the statistic. In last year, there was 2,200 deaths, I think it was, of murders of Christians in Nigeria, and this year already it's over 3,400. You'd think Desmond Cole would care, but of course, because those are black Christians, these aren't the kind of people that Desmond Cole thinks have a right to be defended in the public square, and that's a very this selectivity of the Marxists, and I think that it's really lost a lot of people. The degree to which this is it's a cultural war, but they don't understand where the lines are drawn. This is Marxism through and through. It has different adaptations and influences, whether it's Maoism and some other brands of authoritarianism. They're all converging. But ultimately, what they want to do is overthrow the Judeo-Christian traditions that have built Western society and built wealth and built industrialization and built modernization. They want to set up a system where they're the beneficiaries, where they get to lord over everybody else, and this is exemplified by the conduct of people like Cole, who only address things that advance their agenda, and nothing that actually demonstrates that maybe things aren't quite as perfect in his realm as he would prefer people to pretend they are.
I want to just jump in here because a couple of years ago, like I said, I've been following this character for years, and he doesn't much like me because I've exposed him a few times, but he was part of the group that tried to cancel the Gay Pride Parade in 2017, was it, where they had a sit-in at the corner of Gay in College, or Young in College, and I went on the radio with him the next morning. That was back in the day when they actually respected conservative views. I went on the radio with him, and I said to him, well, Desmond, what about black on black crime? You're worried about, and at that time, his focus was on the police and how terribly blacks were treated and how many times he had been stopped. I don't necessarily believe that he was stopped that many times, but hey, how can you prove it? But I said, what about black on black crime, which continues to be a real issue in Toronto? People shooting each other. Toronto community housing is, a perfect example of drug dens and blacks. I mean, there wasn't a weekend I didn't work when I was still at the Toronto Sun that there weren't shootings, and they were always visible minority, black on black. And he got really upset with me because he doesn't want to deal with, that's what you talk about, selective outrage.
We have a caller. Okay. Hello, you're on live. Can I just ask you your name and where you're from? Sorry, can we get your name and where you're from? Thanks for calling.
My pleasure. So, just to focus on one narrow aspect of how we are being so outmaneuvered by our enemies. These are the very groups who fight with each other over the definition of anti-Semitism. You will never see the black community or any other minority community arguing with each other over what is acceptable or what is bigotry against them. How do you think that in American Congress, the Democrat leadership has gotten away calling out the anti-Semitism of the squad? It's because they have been given a green light by other U.S. groups to say that their criticism of Israel is mainly criticism of anti-Semitism. When delegitimizing Israel for the sole purpose of destroying it, what could be more anti-Semitic than that? Because we have so many Jewish groups who refuse to accept what anti-Semitism is, we end up allowing others to define it for us. Mm-hmm. When you add that to these years that get things wrong, from the left, the Jews control the media, the Jews control this and that, now we're accused, when you defend against anti-Semitism, of trying to control the narrative. And they interchange Jews with Zionists versus the Jews that control the media, now the Zionists that control the media. People like that one call for anti-Semitic in Israel. But they want to use Israel to kind of cover their own anti-Semitism, and we allow them and others like them to define what they should be vis-a-vis Israel. And anyone who tries to set up against that is trying to use Jewish power. But they won't use Jewish power because that doesn't sound nice when you're in education or academia, so they'll call it white power.
It's amazing, Alan. When you highlight the level of this problem and the lack of proper leadership in our community, who we would expect to take the lead, and you have CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, for example, in the United States, that justifies some BDS organizations and Linda Sarsour and the squad and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, when he said in an interview, or a few interviews, not so long ago, that the community in the United States, the Jewish community in the United States, is very weak. We have the J Streets that are working against Israel. But he said the Christian community, there's a large segment of the Christian community that's supportive. It's unbelievable that rather than turning to our community and expecting to be fighting tooth and nail very hard against the BDS and against these outright lies and anti-Semitism, that we have to turn to the Christian community. It was the Christian community, the evangelicals, that were very strong for Israel and had a lot of influence on President Donald Trump to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and much more than that, in fact. So, you know, I hear what you're saying. We're going to continue. You speak out in New York as well. You have a great show and you do the best that you can do, and we're doing the best that we could do. But at the end of the day, you got to work with, if you want to build some kind of allies and fight this head on, start working with people that are effective, that have an interest in this, that are on our side. And, you know, unfortunately, what are we going to do? We're going to work here in Canada with Space Canada. That's the mirror image of J Street. And we're going to make excuses for these people, and they're going to give a platform for guys like Desmond Cole, and they have already done that now. Or the Reconstructionist movement that have taken over conservative synagogues and installed, instead of your traditional conservative rabbi that was very strong for Israel, now you got some progressive lesbian rabbi. And I say that because our community seems to be sensitive for anyone of whatever persuasion, how they want to identify as. But in this Reconstructionist movement, they provide platforms for the BDS and for Jewish Voice for Peace. So when you think that you're showing openness by letting, in quotes, a lesbian rabbi to be there, no. You better sit down with her first and find out. Are you on the side of BDS? What's your position on Israel? You don't just hire anyone because the person's Jewish to be the rabbi of your synagogue. These were traditional conservative synagogues that had many Holocaust survivors that were members, and thousands of people were members and attending high holiday services. Membership is shrinking. The synagogue still exists, but now all of a sudden, instead of your traditional rabbi, you have this Reconstructionist rabbi, and they retweet from the Jewish Voice for Peace, and if not now, and they always slam Israel, and that's it. The leadership in the United States, it's happening slowly more in Canada as well, is ridiculous. And we have to work with people who have our interest in mind.
A couple of points on that, Meir. I was just in New York, and my wife and I took a tour of the Upper East Side, it was a Jewish tour of the Upper East Side. And the tour leader expressed the same concern, that a lot of the synagogues, in order to maintain the millennials, for example, and to capture the younger people, have gotten very left, social justice oriented. Now, it may not be necessarily that there's a lesbian rabbi that's, you know, that not all lesbians are, let's put it that way, social justice warriors against Israel and the social justice warrior in favor of Israel. It's just that the radical left, whether it's gay, straight, are infiltrating some of these synagogues on the premise that they're trying to keep members. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, what the hell were all these Jewish members of our Jewish community and Jewish communities across Canada doing, voting for Justin Trudeau? Justin Trudeau is not pro-Israel, and they should have learned that for the last 6 years. Aaron O'Toole, and I'm not here to flog because he made many mistakes, but at least he talked about the embassy, he talked about preserving, Jewish rights, talked about anti-Semitism, that was in his platform. And yet these Jews, they continue to vote liberal, even if it works against them. It's just uncanny to me that this cognitive dissonance. And it's not any different than the States, because I believe in the States, the Democrat Jews are, just ruining the perception of Zionism and and enabling anti-Semitism, unfortunately.
No question about it.
Meir, if I can.
Is Alan still on the line?
No, he went off.
Oh, Alan.
He went off.
Mayor, if I can just jump in, it's Lon here.
Question.
Second of all, I'll second Sue Ann Levy. My mother is lesbian, and I don't know a stronger Zionist and pro-Israel person than my mom. So I don't think your sexual orientation gives away in any sense where you stand on any position. One thing about New York that Sue Ann, and whoever is
Ron, I just want to clarify something. I'm saying that the community members of the synagogue, they see that this applicant, Rabbi so-and-so, who's a letter doing good, that we're open and everything like that. They didn't sit down with the rabbi and ask what's going on about Israel. So these so-called progressives are slipping in backdoor under the masquerade that they're going to hire me because I'm showing this as my credentials. We have an interest in defending Israel, so they got to sit down. The board has to sit down and ask, where do you stand on Israel?
I wasn't questioning for 1 second. I wasn't questioning you for 1 sec, but we've got an audience. I just want to make sure that our audience, words have a meaning and sentences have power. So I just want to make sure of that. One thing that I wanted to mention about New York was Suren was mentioning it. The largest synagogue actually in New York is a Reformed synagogue run by an Asian lady who converted to Judaism, and that's also on the cusp of anti-pro-Israel, depending how you look at it. What I want to say, though, is it's the most expensive synagogue to attend. It costs the most to be a member. And members of that synagogue include the Israeli ambassador. Members of that synagogue include the Israeli ambassador and other Israeli dignitaries who live in New York. And were asked why, they said because this is where everybody goes. This is where the movers and shakers of our community go. This is where they attend. And if you want to have influence, you got to attend where they attend. So that can tell you a lot about what's happening in New York, where the ambassador of Israel feels the need to attend synagogue, in a Reformed synagogue where there's questions of whether or not that synagogue is truly pro or not Israel. Just a side note from what Suen was mentioning.
Right. I think our doctor in the studio has a short video that he wants to introduce. Is there a doctor in the studio have a short
there is
video
Dr. Studio.
that's
So I got
just waiting
several
to be shown?
demonstrating the anti-Semitism on college campuses. So I'm going to just show just a few seconds from each, but it's just for people who aren't aware of it. Or I just wanted to say, now that I'm on the screen, someone's clicking or typing into the microphone, and it's really loud to our listeners. So if anybody's typing, please stop. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of videos. Hang on.
Okay.
We might as well keep chatting while I screw them up. You'll know when they're on because they'll be on. Okay, I'll be back with you in a minute.
Okay,
Video.
sure.
One more thing, while we're waiting for the videos, I guess,
Ron, you had that
people.
case in Winnipeg with the leader of, if not now, a major Jewish organization.
Yeah, I mean, that's what spurred Marty and myself, to start the J.ca. It was not actually,
Absolutely. Oh, something's happened with the volume. Adjust the volume on that. I don't know why it's not.
You know what? While we're waiting, I'll just mention a comment from one of our viewers, Charles Cook. He talked about a well-funded systemic program of anti-Semitism, whitewashed by wokeness, and made acceptable incubating in our schools. It's not just that it actually happens, but maybe Marty can attest to this as well. There's a very well orchestrated campaign of intimidation when you speak up about it or you write about it. And some of the anti-Semites, the BDS proponents, are using lawfare. I went through, I guess, about 2 years or a year and a half of being faced with a defamation trial and it was orchestrated by the head of BDS in Canada, who also happens to be a lawyer. And of course, they moved it along. I had help from the Sun's legal team. They moved it along. And Stephen Ellis, I'm sure you'll recognize his name.
Sure.
And then just before we were supposed to go to court, of course, they backed out. So they just wanted us to spend money. And this is what they do. They try to silence you. And of course, I had to be very careful what I wrote over the course of the year while they had me, sort of in their talons, legal talons.
Hey, Marty, do you remember what it said on the GoFundMe page for Desmond Cole? What was the warning that they're raising money in order to be able to do what? Do you remember? I highlighted it for you. I'm going to try and find it. It was to silence the Jews, wasn't it? We're going to raise enough money that we can go out there and silence those people who are opposing.
That was, I think, the CJPME thing?
It was a GoFundMe for the people raising money to help support Cole.
I think that
and
was
the DeVille guy.
thing. They want to raise money for basically for what Suez described, essentially are slap suits. I guess in some cases they aren't.
Yeah.
But the idea was to tie up Jewish advocacy organizations in litigation for challenging the Palestinian narrative.
Yeah. And look how much our friend from Food Vendors has managed to raise from her friends.
I'm going to cut it with a quick little video on the New York University campus. And we all know that it's the largest Jewish body of any campus or college in the world. So I'm going to just... Again, and what's particularly interesting about that is that's where Thane Rosenbaum went to college, and my daughter went to college. There's more Jews at NYU as far as percentage than any other college that's not a specifically Jewish college, and that's what we're finding there. So you all keep talking. I'm now going to show something from Rutgers. There's colleges all over America are now allowing anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian groups to basically offend, insult, and threaten the lives of the Jews on campus.
Here, Marty, I found what they wrote there. They wrote, "We believe their actions amount to harassment, libel, and defamation, and will pursue any and all legal avenues to ensure pro-Israel lobby groups that openly support illegal occupation and attack supporters of Palestinian human rights think twice before they do so." So
Yeah,
they're
and
telling you right out, that's what we're raising money for, so that we can shut down people who raise any kind of concern about what we're doing.
The Rutgers professor is accused of posting anti-Semitic sentiments on social media, and he's been removed from his position as a director at the school. Michael Chikindas was a director of the Center for Digestive Health. Since his statements on Facebook, he has been barred from teaching courses and is required to take cultural sensitivity training courses. The university is also looking at additional disciplinary action through the faculty union. The Rutgers professor is accused of posting anti-Semitic sentiments on social media, and he's been removed from his position as a director at the school.
Well, there you have it. That's Rutgers. That's NYU. I'm going to flash on a couple more while you're all still chatting.
I wish that the presidents of universities in Toronto were as strong on the anti-Semitic issues. I mean, I have found that when they're brought to their attention, they just hide behind the free speech argument.
Let's consider for a moment this semester there's a class called The History of Slavery in the United States. And the professor makes racist comments on social media. Would that be okay? To Jewish students here at UNC's campus, that standard is not being applied when it comes to Israel.
There is just one course this fall devoted specifically to the Arab-Israeli conflict, HI 277. The professor is Kylie Broderick, a graduate student and PhD candidate. Like most students who want to sign up for any class, sophomore Abby Adams first doing a little research.
The language that she used on her Twitter, I think, are words that are synonymously used with Jews. You just replace Zionist with Jew, and it's pretty obvious that it's anti-Semitic.
The tweets include references to, quote, Zionist dirtbags, calling the creation of Israel a Nakba, or catastrophe, even referring to the U.S. as a, quote, imperialist death cult. Adams, despite her wanting a challenging academic experience, dropping out of the class, but also dropping a line to UNC Chancellor Kevin Guskowitz.
They are supposed to challenge us, but they're not supposed to make us feel invalidated in who we are and our own history. Because I think in any generation, anti-Semitism is mutated to be acceptable in whatever form.
Different forms of anti-Semitism appearing on campus before, including Nazi graffiti at the Campus Y and a 2019 conference on Gaza, where a rapper invited cheering students to be more like Mel Gibson. The fallout from that event, leading to donors wanting money back and a deal with the U.S. Department of Education that if UNC were to get certain federal funds, it would need to take steps to fight anti-Semitism.
Postscript to that, I don't think that's happening nearly enough at U of T, Ryerson, or York. And here's where we talk about, the parents. Where are they? Where are the big donors in the Jewish community? There have been a few brave souls who have withdrawn their support, notably Bronfman, with respect to York University in film studies. But I haven't heard anybody withdraw their support from University of Toronto or Ryerson, and Ryerson is a hotbed of anti-Semitism, and U of T has become just as bad.
I think it's an issue of them being afraid that God forbid they stand up to what's right, what would be the implications on them.
We'll do. We're not going to relax on this issue. And we're going to see to it that Desmond Cole and his other BDS friends and allies are not going to be able to spread their in the school system. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We're going to continue, like I said, we have a lot of work to do. And we'll find allies who will work with us. This is a must. This is very serious, and we're going to be hearing cases here in Toronto of Jewish kids being attacked in public too, as a result of BDS. And we will hold the and various officials at the TPSB responsible for that. We'll be doing our research where they can be found in order to respond. I want to thank everyone for joining. Unfortunately, Ryan Belrose wasn't with us today. He would have been able to add another dimension to the discussion, but we'll continue on and we'll have more discussions as we move forward. So thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
A song at every episode that we'll close off with. And if there's closing statements from it, that could say, we'll start with Marty, go with Ron, then go to Sue Ann. Thane already left. Yeah, so just very briefly.
All Jewish parents who have kids in public schools across this country have to make these kinds of issues that they're encountering in Toronto. This has to be put at the top of their awareness, the top of their agenda. They have to be vigilant, and they have to, as I said, they have to take action, or their kids are going to get, there's going to be an audience. The kids are going to go along to get along, they're going to get brainwashed, they're going to get beaten up. None of those three are acceptable. And my concern now is that the parents and the children of kids in schools, public schools in Canada.
I guess I'll go next. Gary, do you have that? I'll go next. Gary, do you have that photo that I sent you a second ago? I just want to finish off. I want to finish off with this photo, if I may. Because there's a lot of echo. The reason I want to finish off with this photo because it pretty much sums up the battle that we're in. The gentleman here is Firaz Al-Najim from Canadian Defenders for Human Rights. You know, Hussein unites us all. Take a look at the photos there in his poster. Take a look at the one photo at the bottom right-hand corner. I don't have to say much more about the battle we're facing. That's it for me.
And I guess I will follow up by saying a person from a Jewish advocacy organization has said to me that it's like whack-a-mole. You get rid of one anti-Semitic dispeller of untruths, and another one pops up. I think the Jewish communities in Toronto and beyond are deluding themselves if they think that it's going to go away, because it's not. It's getting worse. And I think that a lot of people, by not speaking up, have enabled it to continue. And this is exactly what the Jew haters want, for to be enabled to continue. And I think it's going to be a fight that's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And you have to have strong people like Meir and Ron and the others who've been on this podcast to say enough is enough and continue to expose. I'm of the school of name and shame, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
Absolutely. That's there's no question about it, at the very least. Yes. Name and shame. The evidence, it's all there. Just get it out there, and let's expose them and confront them, and confront those who are enabling such anti-Semitism at the TDSB. Absolutely. Sue, you've contributed so much, and you continue to. So thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
I want to quickly just put on the screen a picture of Davia, since we've all been talking about him, and I know the local people in Toronto are familiar with him, but I thought we'd just flash him on the screen too, while we're making sure everybody knows who we're speaking about. So this is the gentleman we spoke of, and it's interesting, once again, as said earlier, this is not a black person, this is not a Palestinian, this is a blatant BDS supporter who's using this as his platform and distributing it. And we know what happens. It goes to the staff, and then from them, it goes to their homes, then to their spouses and their children, then back to school again. So we need to call these people out as we're doing and write letters and complain. I'm going to play a quick closing song, then anybody who wants to after that is welcome to make a final comment. So let's cue up that song.
נפש יהודי הומייה ולפתן מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו שנות 2000 להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון
Well, thank you all for joining us, everybody. We're going to close.
Thank you all for joining us, everybody. We're going to close. Thank you all for joining us, everybody. We're going to close. Thank you all for joining us, everybody.
שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל